At my granddaughter's wedding, I discovered exactly what my family thought of me, and they made sure every guest could see it. I have always believed that weddings are supposed to bring families closer together. They are supposed to be about love, new beginnings, and the people who helped make those moments possible. That morning, I woke up with a full heart. My granddaughter Jennifer was getting married, and despite everything life had taken from me over the years, I felt grateful that I could still be there to witness one of the happiest days of her life. At 68, I no longer moved as quickly as I once did, but I took extra care getting ready. I chose a pale blue dress, the same color my late husband Robert always said brought out my eyes. I carefully styled my silver hair, fastened the pearl necklace he gave me on our 30th anniversary, and stood in front of the mirror for a moment longer than usual. For a brief second, I imagined Robert standing beside me, smiling the way he always did before family celebrations. The ceremony at St. Andrew's Church was beautiful. Jennifer looked radiant walking down the aisle. My son Richard sat proudly in the front row, while his wife Pamela dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Looking at them, anyone would have thought we were the perfect family. After the ceremony, everyone headed to the reception at the Grand Oak Ballroom. The building overlooked a small lake, and sunlight reflected across the water as guests arrived dressed in elegant suits and evening gowns. Laughter filled the entrance hall. Glasses clinked. Music drifted softly from inside. Everything seemed perfect. Then I approached the registration table. A young woman greeted me warmly and handed me a name tag with a smile. "Here you are, Mrs. Edwards." I thanked her and glanced down. At first, I thought I had read it wrong. I blinked and looked again. My fingers tightened around the card. Instead of Alice Edwards, grandmother of the bride, the tag read, "The old lady who's paying for everything." For a moment, I simply stood there. The noise around me seemed distant. The laughter, the conversations, the music, all of it faded behind the words staring back at me. Surely it was a mistake. It had to be. The young woman noticed my expression. "Is everything okay?" she asked politely. I forced a small smile. "I'm sure there's been some kind of mix-up." She began searching through the stack of cards, but I gently stopped her. "It's all right," I said. "Don't worry about it." I pinned the tag to my dress and walked into the ballroom. As I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. A few guests glanced at the tag and quickly looked away. Others exchanged knowing smiles. One couple whispered to each other before turning their backs. The uneasy feeling in my stomach grew heavier with every step. Then I spotted Pamela across the room. The moment her eyes landed on my name tag, a smile spread across her face. Not a surprised smile, not a confused smile, a satisfied one. And that was when I realized something that chilled me far more than the words themselves. This wasn't a printing error. Someone had planned it. Someone wanted every person at that wedding to see exactly what they thought I was. And judging by the smiles around the room, I was the last one to find out. I stood near the back of the ballroom, holding a glass of sparkling water I had no intention of drinking. Around me, guests moved from table to table, laughing and congratulating the newlyweds. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the room, and a string quartet played softly near the dance floor. From a distance, everything looked elegant. Perfect, even. But once I started paying attention, I noticed something unsettling. People were looking at me differently. Not with affection, not with respect. They were looking at me with the awkward amusement reserved for someone who had become the subject of a joke. A woman I recognized from Richard's neighborhood approached me with a polite smile. Her eyes drifted toward my name tag before quickly returning to my face. "Alice, this wedding is absolutely stunning," she said. "You must be very proud." There was something strange in her tone, something rehearsed. "Jennifer looks beautiful," I replied. The woman nodded. "Well, after everything you paid for, she certainly deserves a perfect day." Before I could answer, she excused herself and disappeared into the crowd. "Everything you paid for." The words lingered in my mind. A few minutes later, I heard laughter behind me. Not loud laughter. The kind people use when they think they are being discreet. I turned slightly and saw 3 guests standing near one of the floral displays. One of them glanced toward me before whispering something that caused the others to smile. They were not cruel people. Most of them barely knew me. Yet somehow they all seemed to understand a joke that I had never been told. I looked across the ballroom and found Richard speaking with a group of business associates. For a moment, I considered walking over and asking him directly what was going on. Instead, I watched. One of the men clapped him on the shoulder and pointed toward me. Richard laughed. Not an uncomfortable laugh. Not the laugh of someone embarrassed by a misunderstanding. A genuine laugh. My chest tightened. Richard had always been a good boy when he was young. Thoughtful. Kind. The type of child who brought me wildflowers from the yard and insisted on carrying grocery bags that were far too heavy for him. Looking at him now, surrounded by smiling guests and expensive suits, I struggled to recognize the little boy I had raised. Then I spotted Pamela making her way through the room. She moved confidently from group to group, accepting compliments as though the wedding had been organized entirely through her own efforts. Every few minutes her eyes drifted toward me. Each time, that same satisfied expression appeared on her face. Finally, she approached. "Alice," she said warmly. Too warmly. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "It is a beautiful wedding," I answered. Her gaze dropped to my name tag. "Oh good. I was worried you might be upset." There it was. Not surprise. Not confusion. Confirmation. I held her gaze. Should I be upset? Pamela laughed lightly and waved her hand. "It is just a little family joke. Everyone knows you helped make today possible. You should take it as a compliment." "A compliment?" I nodded slowly. "I see." Her smile widened, apparently satisfied with my reaction. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Besides, everyone already knows anyway." She walked away before I could respond. Everyone already knows. I remained standing there long after she left. The music continued. Glasses clinked. Guests cheered as Jennifer and her new husband entered the dance floor for their first dance. Yet all I could think about was one simple question. If everyone already knew, then how long had they all been talking about me this way behind my back? The rest of the evening passed in a blur of smiling faces and polished speeches, but I could not stop thinking about Pamela's words. Everyone already knows. I repeated them silently as I watched servers move between tables carrying plates of filet mignon and roasted vegetables. Every centerpiece, every flower arrangement, every sparkling light reflected a level of expense that would have made Robert shake his head. Yet I had never complained. Jennifer had dreamed about this wedding since she was a little girl, and when Richard told me the costs were becoming overwhelming, I stepped in without hesitation. Sitting there now, I began adding up the memories. The first check had been for the venue. Then came the flowers, the photographer, the live band, the custom invitations. Every time Richard called sounding worried, I told him not to stress. Family helps family. That was what I believed. As the newlyweds moved from table to table greeting guests, I noticed something else. People were not thanking me. They were not acknowledging my generosity. Instead, they seemed amused by it, as if my willingness to help had somehow become evidence of foolishness. Near the dessert table, I overheard two women talking. They were standing only a few feet away and apparently assumed I could not hear them over the music. Pamela said Alice covered almost everything. One woman whispered. The other laughed softly. Must be nice having a personal bank. They both chuckled before walking away. I stared at the wedding cake. For tears. White roses made from sugar. Perfectly crafted. Suddenly, I felt tired. Not physically tired. Something deeper than that. The kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing you have misunderstood people for a very long time. My thoughts drifted backward through the years. Richard's first home. I had contributed the down payment because interest rates were climbing and he was worried about qualifying for the mortgage. Then there was his small consulting business that struggled during its first year. I had written another check. When Jennifer was accepted into an out-of-state university, I quietly paid part of her tuition after learning she was considering turning down her dream school because of costs. I never kept score. I never wanted recognition. I simply wanted my family to have opportunities. Looking back now, I wondered if that had been my mistake. Perhaps generosity becomes invisible when people expect it. Perhaps gratitude disappears when help arrives too often. Later that evening, I found myself standing alone near a large window overlooking the lake behind the ballroom. The sun had disappeared, leaving only reflections of light dancing across the dark water. For a few peaceful minutes, nobody approached me. Then I heard Jennifer's voice. "Grandma." I turned and smiled. She looked beautiful, happy, exactly as a bride should look. She wrapped her arms around me briefly. "Thank you for everything," she said. For a moment, my heart softened. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe at least she understood. Then she added, "Mom told me you loved the name tag idea. She said it matched your sense of humor." The smile froze on my face. Jennifer looked completely sincere. completely unaware. My stomach sank. Pamela had not only created the joke, she had convinced others that I was part of it, that I approved, that I found it funny. Did she? I asked quietly. Jennifer nodded. She said you thought it would make people laugh. I looked across the ballroom. Pamela was speaking with a group of guests, holding a glass of champagne and smiling like the proud architect of a successful event. At that moment, something shifted inside me. Not anger, not even sadness. Clarity. For the first time all evening, I stopped wondering whether I was being too sensitive. I stopped searching for innocent explanations. The humiliation had been deliberate. The deception had been deliberate. And judging by how comfortable Pamela looked, this was not the first time she had rewritten the story behind my back. It was simply the first time I had finally noticed. The reception continued well into the evening, but I no longer experienced it the way I had when I first arrived. It was as though a curtain had been pulled back, revealing details that had always been there, but that I had chosen not to see. From my seat near the edge of the ballroom, I watched Pamela move effortlessly through conversations, accepting compliments and directing staff as though she owned the event. Every time someone praised the wedding, she smiled proudly. Not once did she mention the people who had helped make it possible. Not once did she mention me. As the band transitioned into another song, I found myself remembering moments from years earlier. Small moments, harmless moments, or so I had believed at the time. The Christmas dinner when Pamela told relatives that the expensive gifts for the children had come from her careful budgeting, even though I had quietly paid for half of them. The family vacation where she thanked everyone for contributing while conveniently forgetting to mention that I had covered the rental house. The birthday party where she accepted praise for organizing everything despite the fact that I had spent weeks arranging details behind the scenes. Individually, those moments seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Near the coffee station, I overheard another conversation. A middle-aged couple was speaking with Richard. They complimented the wedding and joked that he was fortunate to have such generous support. Richard laughed and replied, "Well, my mother likes feeling useful." The word struck me harder than I expected. Useful. Not loved. Not appreciated. Useful. I looked down at my hands folded neatly in my lap. These were the same hands that had worked long hours beside Robert when we were building our life together. The same hands that packed lunches, balanced budgets, and helped create opportunities for the family sitting around that ballroom. Yet somehow, over the years, my role had been reduced to a resource. Something to be used when convenient. Later, I stepped outside for fresh air. The evening breeze carried the scent of the lake and distant pine trees. For the first time all day, the noise faded. The silence felt comforting, honest. I stood near the water watching reflections ripple across the surface. Robert used to love places like this. Whenever life became complicated, he would find a quiet spot and sit for a while before making any important decision. He always said that truth becomes easier to see when everything else grows quiet. As I stood there, I thought about him, about the countless times he had warned me that generosity should never come at the expense of self-respect. At the time, I dismissed those concerns. I believed family was different. Family was supposed to be built on gratitude and love. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and found an older gentleman approaching. For a moment, I did not recognize him. Then he smiled. "Alice," he said warmly. "It has been a long time." It was Martin Reynolds, Robert's attorney. We had not spoken in months. He looked exactly as I remembered. Neatly dressed, calm, observant. The kind of man who noticed more than he said. His eyes briefly settled on my name tag before returning to my face. Something in his expression changed. Not surprise. Not confusion. Concern. "Would you mind if we talked for a few minutes?" he asked gently. I hesitated. Then I nodded. Martin glanced back toward the ballroom where laughter and music still filled the night. "There is something your husband wanted you to know," he said quietly. "Something he hoped you would never need." And for the second time that evening, I felt the ground beneath my assumptions begin to shift. Martin and I walked farther down the stone pathway that bordered the lake until the music from the ballroom became little more than a distant hum. For several moments, neither of us spoke. He simply stood beside me with his hands folded in front of him, looking out across the dark water. Finally, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. The paper looked old. Not worn, but carefully preserved. My breath caught the moment I recognized. Robert's handwriting on the front. It had been 3 years since I had seen those familiar letters. Robert left instructions regarding this envelope, Martin said quietly. He told me to keep it secure unless certain circumstances made it necessary. I stared at the envelope without taking it. What circumstances? I asked. Martin looked toward the ballroom before returning his attention to me. He believed there might come a day when people would stop seeing your value as a person and begin seeing only your value as a source of support. A chill moved through me despite the warm summer evening. That sounded exactly like something Robert would say. He had always noticed things long before I did. Small changes in behavior, hidden motives, patterns that escaped everyone else. I told him he was being overly cautious, Martin continued. I honestly hoped he was wrong. I finally accepted the envelope from his hand. My fingers trembled slightly as I traced Robert's handwriting. For a moment, memories flooded back. Late evenings on the porch, weekend drives through the countryside. The way he would smile whenever he caught me helping someone yet again without expecting anything in return. He used to joke that one day I would give away the entire house if somebody asked politely enough. Back then, we laughed about it together. Now the memory felt different. More serious. More painful. You should open it when you are ready, Martin said. But before you do, there is something else you need to know. I looked up. His expression remained calm, but there was a weight behind his eyes that immediately caught my attention. Over the past several years, Robert made a number of revisions to his estate planning. I frowned. I thought everything was finalized after he passed away. Most of it was, Martin replied. But there were provisions designed specifically to protect you. The words settled heavily between us. Protect me. Robert had always protected me, even when I insisted I did not need it, even when I believed the people around me had good intentions. Martin continued carefully. Your husband loved his family deeply, but he also understood that money has a way of revealing character. He worried that after he was gone, certain people might forget where that money came from and who sacrificed to help build it. I lowered my eyes to the envelope again. Suddenly, the events of the evening began fitting together in ways I did not like. The jokes, the whispers, the assumptions, the complete absence of gratitude. For years I had explained those things away. For years I had chosen the most generous interpretation possible. Standing there beside the lake, I realized Robert had seen the truth long before I had. A burst of laughter drifted from the ballroom behind us. The wedding celebration was continuing as though nothing unusual had happened. Pamela was probably still entertaining guests. Richard was probably still smiling beside his colleagues. Inside, they were enjoying one of the happiest nights of their lives. Outside, everything I believed about my family was beginning to unravel. Do they know about this? I asked quietly. Martin shook his head. No. And Robert specifically requested that they not be informed. I looked at him sharply. Why? A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Because he wanted people to show you respect because they valued you, not because they feared consequences. I stood there silently. The answer felt exactly like Robert. Honest. Fair. Uncompromising. Martin glanced at his watch. The decision is yours, Alice. You can open that envelope tonight. Or you can wait. I looked down at Robert's handwriting one more time. Then I slipped the envelope carefully into my purse. I was not ready to open it. Not yet. But for the first time all evening, I felt something shift inside me. The confusion was fading. In its place came a growing certainty that my husband had left behind more than a letter. He had left behind a truth that somebody had worked very hard to keep hidden. When Martin and I returned to the ballroom, I felt strangely calm. Nothing around me had changed. The music still played. Guests still laughed. Champagne glasses still sparkled beneath the chandeliers. Yet everything looked different because I was seeing it through new eyes. I no longer viewed the evening as a celebration I was fortunate to attend. I was beginning to understand it as a carefully managed performance. Pamela spotted me almost immediately. There you are, she said with a bright smile as she approached. People have been wondering where you disappeared to. I noticed how quickly her eyes moved from my face to my purse. It was only a brief glance, but after everything that had happened, I found myself paying attention to details I once ignored. I needed some air, I replied. Well, you picked a terrible time, she laughed. We are about to start the family photo session. Family photo session. The phrase would not have meant anything to me a few hours earlier. Now I wondered how many family moments had been carefully arranged while quietly placing me exactly where someone wanted me. Pamela led everyone toward a large decorative staircase at the center of the ballroom. A professional photographer began organizing relatives into rows. Children in front, parents in the middle, grandparents seated. At least that was how it should have been. I watched as people took their positions. Jennifer stood beside her husband. Richard stood beside Pamela. Various cousins and relatives filled the remaining spaces. Then the photographer glanced toward me. Before he could speak, Pamela stepped forward. "Alice, why do not you stand over there near the side?" she suggested casually. "We are trying to keep the immediate family group together." Immediate family. The words landed softly but carried considerable weight. For a moment, nobody reacted. Several relatives avoided eye contact. A few shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer looked confused but said nothing. Richard remained silent. I stood exactly where I was. Then the photographer checked his notes. "Actually," he said politely, "Mrs. Edwards is listed in the center position for the family portrait." Pamela's smile tightened for the briefest second. "Really?" she asked. "That must be an old version." The photographer shook his head. "This was provided by the wedding coordinator 3 months ago." I noticed several heads turning toward Pamela, not because they suspected anything, simply because the exchange felt awkward. Pamela recovered quickly. "Of course," she said with a laugh. "Then the center is perfect." I moved to the designated spot and sat quietly while the photographs were taken. But something important had happened. For the first time all evening, I had witnessed a plan fail. A small plan. An insignificant plan. Yet a plan nonetheless. After the photographs ended, guests returned to their tables. The wedding reception gradually shifted into dancing and conversation. I found myself sitting alone for several minutes, reflecting on everything Martin had told me. Eventually, curiosity overcame caution. I opened my purse and looked at the envelope again. Robert's handwriting seemed almost alive beneath the soft ballroom lighting. I traced my finger across the front. Then, slowly and carefully, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter and a folded legal document. My heart pounded as I unfolded the first page. The letter was dated 6 months before Robert's passing. "Dear Alice, if you are reading this, then something has happened that convinced Martin it was time. First, know that I love you. Second, know that none of what follows was written because I doubted you. It was written because I understood people." Tears filled my eyes as I continued reading. Robert explained that he had spent years observing subtle changes within the family. He noticed increasing entitlement, increasing dependence on financial support. Most importantly, he noticed a gradual decline in gratitude. Then I reached a sentence that made me stop breathing for a moment. "I have created protections not against strangers, but against those who may someday forget who helped build everything they enjoy." Beneath the letter sat the folded legal document. I had not yet opened it, but as I looked across the ballroom toward Pamela and Richard laughing with guests, I suddenly understood that Robert had anticipated far more than I ever imagined. For several minutes, I simply sat there holding the folded document in my hands. Around me, the celebration continued uninterrupted. Guests filled the dance floor. Laughter echoed through the ballroom. Servers carried trays of desserts from table to table. Nobody seemed aware that my entire understanding of the family had shifted over the course of a single evening. I looked down at the legal document and finally unfolded it. The language was formal, exactly as one would expect from something prepared by attorneys. Yet the meaning became clear almost immediately. Robert had established a special provision connected to portions of the family trust. The provision did not focus on money. It focused on conduct. Specifically, it addressed intentional humiliation, manipulation, or public disrespect directed toward me. If such behavior could be reasonably demonstrated, certain benefits could be reconsidered or revoked. I read the page twice to make sure I understood it correctly. Then I read it a third time. Robert had not created a trap. He had created a safeguard. The difference mattered. He had never wanted revenge. He simply refused to reward people for treating others poorly. I carefully folded the document and returned it to my purse. At that moment, I could have walked directly to Martin. I could have asked questions. I could have started a process that very night. Instead, I found myself thinking about something Martin had said beside the lake. Robert wanted people to respect me because they valued me, not because they feared consequences. The thought stayed with me. Across the room, Jennifer was laughing with friends. She looked genuinely happy. Whatever mistakes had been made, I was not willing to believe that everyone in the family shared the same intentions. Not yet. I wanted certainty before making any decision. A little later, Richard approached my table carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to me and smiled. "Having a good time, Mom?" he asked. I studied his face carefully. He looked relaxed, comfortable, entirely unaware of what I had learned. "It has been an interesting evening," I replied. He laughed. "That sounds mysterious." I waited. Part of me hoped he would bring up the name tag. Explain it. Apologize for it. Anything. Instead, he nodded toward the dance floor. "Jennifer seems thrilled. All the planning was worth it." There it was again. Planning, effort, success. Yet no acknowledgement of the support that had made much of it possible. Not because he was trying to be cruel. The realization was almost worse. He seemed genuinely accustomed to taking my contributions for granted. "Richard," I asked quietly, "do you think people change over time?" He looked surprised by the question. "Sure. Everybody changes." "And gratitude?" I asked. "Does that change too?" He chuckled awkwardly. "I guess that depends on the person." Before I could continue, someone called his name from across the room. He smiled and excused himself. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, yet it told me more than I expected. He never asked why I seemed troubled, never asked how I felt about the evening, never mentioned the joke attached to my name. As he walked away, Pamela appeared beside him and slipped her arm through his. They exchanged a few words before both glanced briefly in my direction. Then they smiled and continued toward another group of guests. I sat quietly, watching, not angry, not hurt, simply observant. The document remained inside my purse. The decision remained mine. And for the first time all evening, I realized I was no longer looking for excuses on anyone's behalf. I was looking for the truth. Before this night ended, I intended to find out exactly who still saw me as family and who only saw me as useful. The reception began winding down shortly after 10 o'clock. Guests who had spent hours celebrating started gathering purses, jackets, and gifts. The band played softer music. Conversations became smaller and more intimate. Yet I remained exactly where I was, quietly watching. Something unexpected happened during those final hours. Once I stopped making excuses for people, I started noticing things with remarkable clarity. Pamela moved through the room collecting compliments as though she had personally created every joyful moment of the evening. Each time someone praised the wedding, she accepted the credit naturally. Each time someone mentioned the family, she positioned herself at the center of the story. What struck me most was not what she said. It was what nobody challenged. Near the gift table, I overheard her speaking with 2 relatives from her side of the family. "Honestly," she said with a laugh, "if I had not taken charge, none of this would have come together." One of the women nodded approvingly. Then Pamela added something that made me pause. "Some people contribute money. Others contribute vision." The women laughed. Pamela smiled. The comment was subtle enough that most people would have ignored it. Earlier that day, I probably would have ignored it too. But now I understood exactly what she meant. Money came from me. Recognition belonged to her. A few minutes later, Jennifer approached my table. She looked exhausted but happy. The kind of happiness that comes after months of planning finally reached their conclusion. She sat beside me and slipped off her shoes beneath the table. "I think my feet may never recover," she joked. I smiled. For the first time all evening, our conversation felt genuine. "You looked beautiful today," I told her. "Thank you, Grandma." She hesitated. Then she looked down at her hands. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did something happen between you and Mom?" The question surprised me. "Why would you ask that?" Jennifer frowned slightly. "I do not know. You both seemed different tonight." I studied her expression carefully. There was concern there. Real concern. Not manipulation. Not performance. Just uncertainty. "Jennifer," I asked gently, "when you saw my name tag earlier, what did you think?" She blinked. "Mom told me it was a joke that everyone agreed on." Her answer came immediately. Too immediately. As though she had never questioned it. "And did you agree?" I asked. She looked uncomfortable. "I thought it was unusual. But Mom said you approved it." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Jennifer shook her head slowly. "You did not approve it, did you?" I looked into her eyes and saw something important. For the first time that evening, someone was asking a question because they genuinely wanted the truth. Not because they wanted a convenient answer. "No," I said quietly. Jennifer's face changed instantly. Confusion gave way to embarrassment. Then embarrassment gave way to something else. Understanding. She looked across the ballroom toward Pamela. I did not. "No." I believe you, I replied. Jennifer swallowed hard. Grandma, I am sorry. The apology was simple, honest, unrehearsed. And because of that, it mattered more than all the speeches I had heard that evening. A few minutes later, Jennifer was called away by friends preparing for the final send-off. As she walked away, I noticed her glance toward Pamela several times. Questions had been planted, questions that would not disappear easily. I remained seated, watching the final moments of the celebration unfold. The document inside my purse felt heavier than paper should feel, yet I still had not acted. I still had not spoken to Martin again. Because despite everything, I wanted one final thing before making any decision. I wanted certainty. By the time the last guests left the ballroom and the lights began dimming, I realized that certainty was much closer than I had imagined. The cracks were already beginning to appear, and sooner or later, someone was going to reveal far more than they intended. The following Tuesday, Martin invited me to his office. The wedding was over. The flowers had wilted. The photographs were already appearing on social media. To everyone else, life had moved on. For me, it felt as though I had finally opened my eyes. Martin greeted me warmly and led me into a conference room overlooking downtown Hartford, the same room where Robert and I had signed countless documents over the years. After a few minutes, Richard and Pamela arrived. Neither seemed concerned. In fact, Pamela looked unusually confident. She assumed the meeting involved routine estate matters. Jennifer arrived shortly afterward. Unlike the others, she appeared nervous. We exchanged a brief smile before taking our seats. Martin opened a folder and folded his hands together. Thank you all for coming, he began. There are several matters related to Robert Edwards' estate that require clarification. Pamela immediately leaned forward. Is there a problem? She asked. Martin remained calm. That depends on how one views accountability. The room grew quiet. He then presented copies of the document Robert had prepared years earlier. Slowly and carefully, he explained its purpose. The provision was not about controlling people. It was not about punishment. It existed to protect dignity and discourage intentional humiliation directed toward me. As Martin spoke, Pamela's confident expression began to fade. Richard looked increasingly confused. Jennifer stared at the papers in front of her. Then Martin reviewed several documented incidents that had been brought to his attention, including evidence from the wedding, the custom name tag, witness statements, emails discussing the idea beforehand, messages showing that the joke had been planned and approved despite knowing I had never consented to it. Pamela's face turned pale. This is ridiculous, she said. It was a harmless joke. Martin nodded politely. The document specifically addresses public humiliation disguised as humor. Richard looked at Pamela. You told me Mom knew about it. For the first time, Pamela had no immediate answer. The silence said more than any explanation could. Jennifer lowered her eyes. Grandma asked me that night whether I thought she approved it, she said softly. I realized then that she had never even been told. Richard slowly turned toward me. The confidence that had surrounded him for years seemed to disappear all at once. Mom, he said quietly, is that true? I met his eyes. Yes. Nothing more. Just one word. The truth did not require a speech. Martin continued. Based on the provisions Robert established, several future distributions from the trust would be redirected to charitable causes Robert had personally selected. The decision had already been authorized through the structure of the estate. Nobody was being left destitute. Nobody was being ruined. But certain privileges they assumed were guaranteed would no longer be available. Pamela looked stunned. Richard sat motionless. Jennifer wiped away a tear. What happened next surprised me most. Jennifer stood and walked around the table. Then she hugged me. I am sorry, she whispered. I should have asked questions sooner. I squeezed her hand. Now you know. That was enough. As the meeting ended, Richard approached me near the elevator. For several seconds he struggled to find words. Finally he said, I thought I was being a good son. Somewhere along the way, I stopped paying attention. I nodded. Money did not change anyone, Richard. It simply revealed what people chose to value. He lowered his head. I stepped into the elevator and the doors closed. As I descended toward the lobby, I thought about Robert. He had never wanted revenge. Neither did I. What I wanted was something far simpler. Respect. Honesty. Basic human decency. In the end, the trust did not expose my family's character. Their own choices did that. And as I walked into the afternoon sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in years, because for the first time, I no longer needed anyone's approval to understand my worth.